We're back, baby. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Swingman podcast. It's podcast number 135. The NBA is back. It's in full swing. It's been about 2 weeks, and this whole podcast is us going to be talking about what we've learned from the NBA inside the first 2 weeks. As ever, I am your host, Jordan Ledger, joined as I am all the time by Louis Halpin and Lewis Howard, who are going to run through this 2 weeks action with me. Before we dive into the NBA antics, though, chaps, how you doing? Are you well?
I'm doing good. I am so happy the NBA is back because it was a long time waiting for it. It felt like, and obviously we've got some other sports, but just because of the level or the amount of games that are played with the NBA, it feels like when it comes back, you're just chucked back into it and good, ready to get stuck into it.
I mean, personally, I'm quite cold, but I share this enthusiasm for the NBA restarting again. That's how the basketball started, actually, because it was too cold to play in the winter. So yeah, I'm pretty excited as well. It's been some interesting things. I mean, there's been a couple teams that have stood out. I guess we'll get into that. But I've also enjoyed. I'm not sure what you two have thought. I mean, we've only had one game of the in-season tournament right so far, or the in-season tournament games. That was on Friday, and we're recording this on Tuesday, the 7th of November. So there'll be another set of games tonight, I believe. I appreciate the different look they've gone through the courts. I thought that was really cool. Jerseys suck. I'm yet to see it really, I think, manifesting something that people are going to care about. But maybe when it gets to the knockout in Las Vegas and everything, it'll get into that stage. But yeah, I've enjoyed the first couple of weeks and the sort of storylines and new players that have abounded from it.
Yeah, I don't think there's any games on tonight because I think that was I remember it via So Rare as to how I've basically determined when there's in-season tournament games, and there wasn't any lineups to be set this week. So I don't think there's any going on today.
I want to say it's Suns Lakers, not today, tomorrow, I think.
Yeah, I think there's no NBA today, and then there's games that are on our Thursday early morning is how it technically works. But that's all of that. But yeah, I mean, the NBA being back in general is just, it feels a little bit too good to be true at the moment for me. It's still like really early days. It feels like we're in preseason, even though we're not. But it's nice to have it back. It's nice to have general basketball discussions going on. It's not nice to hear all the hyperbole ones that you get on First Take and everything that go to the extremes, but I'm sure that comes part and parcel of everything that we have within the NBA. Let's move on though into discussing the 2 weeks that we're going to be doing in this podcast in general, and the format in which we're going to go off this on, and we'll probably do this format for quite a few podcasts this year. And we're going to basically talk about rising stocks of players, GMs, coaches, teams in general. We're going to talk about teams and things that are on the up and also that are on the way down. And to introduce that segment, we're going to be talking about teams. And I feel we start with the positives is how I'd look at this. I don't know about you two. And I think if we look at players and teams that are on the up, the very expensive graphic that I found here and spent a lot of time on to illustrate this, we're going to talk about just in general what these 2 weeks have taught us and who are on the up. Louis, I'll throw it over to you first. Who's on the up in the NBA right now?
Oh, okay. Throwing it to me. Very graciously, I'm going to nominate my beloved Minnesota Timberwolves on the stock
Have to.
Yeah, I guess we've talked about it a bit before. I guess it depends where you're coming from in this type of thing. If, we're just going like the best teams, like Denver and Boston would have stocks up, but we kind of had them in our over-unders podders like the best teams in the East and West. And surprisingly enough, they're very good. So maybe we'll talk about, someone will pick them at some stage and we can talk about how great they are. But I've gone for one who I was a bit more sort of lukewarm on. I think I put them as the under for our over-under. I can't remember what they were set as, 44.5, something like that. And they've been impressive to start the season. They had a rough start at Toronto, which was disappointing. Cat had a pretty poor possession to end that game. But I think they've really sort of figured it out maybe in terms of playing with those two bigs. Of course, there are issues that come with that, and I think there'll be issues that come with that in the playoffs as well. But I feel like where teams have gone smaller, I think the Timberwolves are like a completely unique prospect in how big they are and how large they are and how they dominate the paint. I believe I just looked at it before, and they lead the league in defensive rating. That's not saying much, but with like a short sample size, because I looked in the Pacers, I think, lead in offensive rating, which I think is kind of swayed by the fact they scored 151 points against the San Antonio Spurs last night.
Yeah.
So, you know, take it with a grain of salt. But I think, you know, that big pairing of Towns and Gobert is working a little bit better. It has its issues sometimes, I think, offensively. And I think for Edwards as well, it's a bit of a struggle with the floor spacing. But, I mean, he had a great game last night against the Celtics, snapped their winning the streak. They're also the only team to beat the Denver Nuggets. Yeah. And I think from the perspective we were starting the season with, although I think George was a bit higher on the Timberwolves than both of us were, they look solid so far. They look like they're really within that playoff picture, and that's what you can kind of ask for, I guess, from that team. It will take Anthony Edwards, I think, going a step up to propel them into anything more. But you know, if we were sort of discussing whether Towns or Gobert would be traded before the season, and now we're like, oh, this is working a little bit, I think that has to be a automatic stock rising for me.
Yeah, and I think that's you said it when we're talking about some teams with this segment. I think for me, when I look at who to choose, it's teams that have are exceeding the expectations I have for them. Because obviously, then your stocks in the teams rise, obviously. And with the Timberwolves, because it's the start of the season, there's so many caveats. The main one being, because we've played so many few games, the strength of schedule really matters. Like, there's probably a team that will be in this stocks up section that has had a relatively easy schedule, which is part of the reason why they've got their record. But when you look at the Timberwolves, they've beaten the Nuggets and the Celtics, which you can only really take as a positive sign. They're the only team to do that. And I think it's interesting you bring up the size. I think they are one of the teams that can match Denver and obviously Boston now with Porzingis. They can match up to that size a bit. That's a lot of other teams will end up struggling with. And it just shows, if you just run through the stats, I know you said first in points allowed, first in defensive rating, they're fourth in points differential as well. So even though I still think you can see the growing pains with how them and especially Anthony Edwards is trying to work his way through the offensive side of it, the defensive side is starting to show fruition and they're starting to figure it out a bit with these two bigs. Maybe when more games get played and they face a lot different types of lineups, it'll go back to being, exposed in some cases, not in others. But I think you can only take the positives out of it right now.
I think that's an interesting question, though, because a lot of the best teams in the West, or I'm thinking of the Nuggets and the Lakers in particular, are big teams. And I think you need to have a big team to combat that. And that's why I'm a little bit skeptical about kind of both the Suns and the Warriors a little bit, but more so the Suns, I think, with Nurkic there. I know he's a big body, but he's slow as anything and he's not very good. So that's kind of like where my concern comes from them. But I think they'll suit those bigger games in the West. But yeah, they could get run off the court by smaller teams. And Rudy Gobert, obviously, we know in the playoffs, that's another issue. But it's good so far.
I think we'll talk about the Suns on the maybe the flip side of this segment. But I think what's interesting going along with that, at the start of the season, when I spoke about how the teams that are leading the NBA change the landscape, and maybe because of what Denver's done, people maybe trying to match them with bigger lineups. You see people like Chet and Wemby, the young guys coming up. They're obviously bigger guys. Maybe as a result of that, a team like the Timberwolves will benefit from it and rise up a little bit this year.
I think the issue I see with the Timberwolves, and it is always going to come down to the ceiling of this team with Cat and Gobert in it. And I'm still not a massive lover of it. I'm a huge fan of Anthony Edwards. And I think if you have those two on the court, you've got two bodies in his way necessarily. Cat, not as much. Gobert is the issue. But it seemed at points when one of the other was injured last year, he seems to want to play better with Gobert. But I feel this will be a good season for the Timberwolves if you come out of it and there's not massive question marks around them. Because I feel like at the back end of last season, there definitely was in terms of that trade that they made. And if they can make it work a little bit and then get to the playoffs and see how they do there. But I think, it's definitely a good start. It could have gone. I mean, there's another team that is beginning with it. There's another team that is in this industry right now that have had the worst start possible for them. And it doesn't look like it's going to get any better. But again, we'll leave that for the other side. I'll take on my sort of. We'll do one each. Is that how we want to do this? Is that how we're going to format it? We'll do one each. So mine isn't a team. Mine's a player. And mine is the phenomenon that is Cam Thomas right now. I feel that if anyone's going to have stonks up this week, it's going to be Cam Thomas. He did this. He went on a little bit of a splurt last year of having was it like 2 30, 40-point games back to back or something? Again, did he hit 50? Yeah. I remember these again because of So Rare is primarily it. But in terms of Cam Thomas, he had that start again this year, and I was like, there's no way he'll keep it up. And then it was like a 30-point game, 30-point game, and then a 45-point game the other night. And there comes a stage where he's still only young. He is 22. So I can't expect him to be hitting those sort of nights every single night at the moment for it. But if you do it twice now, you kind of think, maybe there is actually something quite special there. And I know with Brooklyn right now, they're in a bit of a limbo sort of where are they going? What's their season going to be with Mikal Bridges and Ben Simmons, who I think Ben Simmons has started the season all right. I don't think he's set any houses on fire.
He's a stock neutral.
He's a stock neutral. He's a stock neutral, but I mean, it's more than what I thought Ben Simmons would probably be doing, which is good to see in any case. But Cam Thomas is averaging like 29 points to start the season on 7 games on nearly 50% shooting. I think his PER was really high as well when I looked it up. I don't know what his actual shooting of the 3-point line is because he's probably taking so many shots in that Nets team. But it's hard to not have him as a stocks rising player within the league right now, is what I'll say from 2 weeks into it.
I mean, at the end of the day, he's just giving people buckets every game, so you can't be down on him. So it's as simple as that.
Yeah, it's good to see it work for Brooklyn as well. It's just from what they had and then how it went like that. It's quite nice to see it actually work for them.
It's been interesting to see how they're sort of figuring out what their team's really going to look like throughout this season. I still think they're in the stage where they're chopping and changing a few things, maybe seeing where Ben Simmons is going to fit best. Obviously, Cam Thomas has been starting. He wasn't starting. I think that's probably just going to result in him. He's just going to be starting games at this point. Mikal Bridges, I thought, would hit the ground running a bit more than he has, but he had a great game last game, and I think that'll quickly figure itself out. The Nets as a whole is a different story, obviously, but I mean, our expectations are massive for the Nets, so there's not really much to be said there.
They remind me of the Nets team, I think, from before Kyrie and KD got there, where D'Angelo Russell. I mean, Spencer Dinwiddie is back there now, but Spencer Dinwiddie was there at that stage. Just sort of like, they've got a lot of good players, just no one amazing. I think Cam Thomas is a really talented scorer. He can't pass is always the thing with him. I think if you remember, I think it was a preseason game once where I think Steve Nash may have said something about his passing, and then they asked Cam Thomas about it, and he was not too enthused about Steve Nash's comment. Kind of opposite players, really. But in that, he's a really talented scorer. So I think he's like a valuable piece to have. I'd like to see how much he maintains it, and if it can be like a little cheeky all-star run. You never know, something like that. But yeah, he's got to be within the list.
I mean, in stocks rising, he's going to be in and around that most improved player. If it was a 2-week award, I think he'd get it. Yeah. So
I think he's not going to make my stocks rising because we only have one each or whatever. But Jalen Duren as well. That's another guy who I think has been really taking a leap up this year.
Definitely. Right, Lewis, where are you heading to? Who's your stocks rising?
Yeah. So
where? It could be anything.
Yeah, I only did teams. Really, I've put down teams that were performing above my expectations, the one lower. And there's 2 5-1 teams that I'll pick between. I had the Mavs as a potential one, but I think with them, because their schedule's been so easy, and from what I've seen, they haven't really shown me anything where I've thought, that's different or something's changed from last season. So I'll wait and see with them. But I'm actually going to throw in the Sixers because obviously a big trade's gone down. Harden is now gone. And even though I think most people thought they would be fine without him, they'd be able to suffice, I've still got to chuck them in there because they are 5-1. Embiid's playing great. Kelly Oubre's playing well. That's another person you can chuck in stocks rising. I know you've been a fan of him, George. Oh, there we go. Yeah. The unfortunate fine he got for that, but I mean that's just Embiid all over, isn't it? So you got to be when he's in that sort of headspace, he's just performing at his best, I think, when he's joking around and trolling a little bit. But to go into the actual, maybe stats a bit more, I think one thing that always shows the signs of a team that can sustain performances for a long level. Obviously, we're only 6 games in, so this doesn't mean much now. But as you get into the season, I usually look for this, is to see the teams that in offensive rating and defensive rating are both relatively high, because a lot of the time with teams, say like the Pacers now, their offensive rating's massive, like ridiculously massive, and their defensive rating's pretty low, and you'd expect that offensive rating to come down a little bit, and then maybe them to fall a bit more. But the Sixers at the moment are 3rd in offensive rating, 5th in defensive rating, and that is something I think this team can keep up. Whether it'll be that high, I don't know, but I think throughout the season they should be pretty good in both those categories. And so it is something that would lead to a sustainable regular season and a good overall. I know when we were looking at the over-unders before, because of what was going on, I thought it was quite harsh on them. I think it was 47, which usually they pretty much always reach and are quite a bit higher than. So I do expect the Sixers to be a very good team again, but I thought I'd chuck them in here regardless, just because they are playing so well.
Yeah, I think the Kelly Oubre deal is looking better and better each day in terms of getting him on a veteran minimum. Because I said this to you, I think I said this to you, Lewis, off pod anyway. I think in general, when he had his games for the Hornets before he got injured, he was a really solid defensive outlet player that could also have a bucket in him. And essentially, that's kind of what the Sixers required anyway, with or without the James Harden deal going down, which eventually, obviously, it did happen. I think you're freeing up Maxey, and you're seeing what Maxey can do with a little less sort of pressure on him around James Harden, a little bit more time to let him run his own game. And you're seeing Tobias Harris play quite well, is the other thing I think that comes with this. And he's not a pivotal piece for the Philly Sixers, but I feel that when he plays and he's sort of... I've always said it was one of the worst contracts given, and I will still stand by that for the money that he was being paid and for who they chose him over. But there comes a point where there has to be a sort of, where does he fit in this team and how does he play it well? And if he continues playing the way in which he is now under Nick Nurse in this system, I feel like this will be one of the better Tobias Harrises that we've seen within the NBA, sort of looking back at what he was at the Clippers in that sort of sense, because there is no pressure on him with how Embiid plays and how Maxey plays. And now because of the Harden deal, they can either go into it and try and pick someone up at the trade deadline. And I, God, hope they don't try and pick up Pascal Siakam, because that just feels like it'd mess up everything. Or they wait until next summer and then they build from there. The question that then comes with that is Embiid going to wait? And then you've got to rebuild again and everything that comes with it. So, but for the time being, in this short sort of microscope 2-week window that we look at, it's pretty good right now for Philly, because it could have gone all doom and gloom very early doors. If they started losing games, Harden left, it would have been a lot of questions. So
I think credit has to go to Nick Nurse. I mean, Doc Rivers is obviously like a historically great coach in the league, but I think Nick Nurse is a better coach now, and he has been for the last couple of years, especially when Doc Rivers was at Philly. I think it's the first time that they're working with like an actual sort of fluid offensive system. And that is part of the reason, because I think Embiid and Harden, they don't move very much. So now you've got Embiid, who's like, your primary guy that you can go to. But it's a lot of other guys who don't have that ego. They can move around. They can move off ball. They know their role players a little bit. So that's nice in the regular season. I think in the postseason is where you want stars, basically. And maybe Tyrese Maxey can develop into that. I mean, obviously, they didn't get anything sort of really massive back from the James Harden trade, which is kind of as it is. His value wasn't high at that stage, and I think it was as good as they could do, to be honest. But
I feel in terms of the cap space that they got off book, they done pretty well. Moving PJ Tucker in that sense, they've done. I know. You've got 2 first-round picks and a couple of pick swaps for James Harden, a guy who's retiring, and then a few other players. But I feel that the ability to then have those players off the books to then move into next season is something that comes with it. That could, depending on who they get, you look at this when it happens No, I know, but when it happens, there's always stuff that will move around, and then you can really assess the trade. That's why.
I get that's fair enough, and they had to move hard. I'm not denying that. No. This was the best that they could do, but I don't think cap space is not always an answer. It can be an answer in like a great free agency class, like we had a couple of years ago. KD, LeBron, AD, they all moved, but the best free agent that you're going to get this upcoming season is Pascal Siakam, and then you got Buddy Hield. So it's Klay Thompson maybe throw in there if you think he's still that good. It's not like a massive win on that front. I think the picks are really good from what they got from that, and I also think it's quite good that the Thunder managed to wrangle themselves a pick swap with the Clippers. I don't know how they managed to do it every single time, but I think it's a positive outlook for the regular season. I think they have a ceiling, if I'm quite honest, in the postseason, but that's all to come.
That's talk down the line, I think. You're not wrong.
Yeah.
Because once again, I look back at the power rankings that people had said before, I think everyone would have the Celtics and the Bucks above the Sixers. But
but
it's a long season.
The Bucks haven't looked great.
Yeah,
the Bucks haven't looked great.
I wouldn't chuck the Bucks in. I know we're going to get to stocks down. I wouldn't chuck them in that though. But I will say defensively, it does look like they're going to take some time to figure it out.
Indeed. Right. And do you know what? You've mentioned it. Hang on. I've lost my graphic. Stay with me. There we go. Let's talk about stocks down within the NBA in the first 2 weeks. I'm going to throw it to you, Lewis, first. Where is your who is your what is your stocks down selection in the NBA?
I feel once again, I was only looking at teams, but I feel kind of bad because I don't feel bad. That's pushing it too much. But with every team, I would put in stocks down that I think is performing below my expectations I had for them. I feel like there's an asterisk on every single one where something's happened that has led to it. But I'll leave one team for someone else to say. I think someone else say it. I'm just going to go with the Grizzlies because I know
I already had it ready. I had it ready.
Yeah. They haven't got Ja Morant, obviously. And so that's a massive detriment to the team. He's the best player on the team. But we did see before when he wasn't playing, they managed to steady the ship a bit for when he came back. And this year, obviously, when we were discussing where we think they'll end up, once again, the question came up, the period they haven't got him, are they going to be able to steady the ship, maybe get a couple wins? And the reason I think I'd put them in this is because they have some really bad losses on their record right now. Like they've lost to the Wizards, who look like they're just out there to play basketball and just have a bit of fun every game. They've lost to the Trailblazers. They lost to the Mavs, which is obviously fine, but there's a lot of losses as well, which led to them being 1-6. And their offense is just absolutely putrid. Like, it's nearly the worst. Yeah. They're 29
It's really bad.
It feels like it's just like, all right, Desmond Bain, just every game it's like Desmond Bain, so what you can do. They're like, how can you drag us to a point where we can maybe win the game? And obviously, Jaren Jackson Jr. adds a bit there as well. But outside of them two, it's not much else going on. So I've been disappointed with how bad they've been without Ja Morant. Obviously, they haven't got Ja Morant, so there is that little caveat.
I don't think the Ja Morant caveat is enough. It's not to be 1-6.
Yeah,
no, they got Desmond Bain, they got Marcus Smart, they got Jaren Jackson Jr., they got some other nice pieces. It's just been putrid. It has been horrendous. Jaren Jackson Jr. has covered himself in a decent light, though. He hasn't been awful. But I will say that there has been some other players on that team that need to go and check themselves because they've come into this situation. I feel like they've come in with an ego and they haven't performed that well. And they're not really buying into it, is what it looks like. But it's
and obviously having Marcus Smart as your
Marcus Smart must be crying every night in bed, by the way. Look at how good the Celtics are and look at how rubbish the Grizzlies look.
And obviously he's a fantastic player and one of the best defensive players and defensive guards in the NBA. But when someone like Ja's out and you need people to step up and carry the load a bit, unfortunately he's not that type of player. So he can't add to the offense really much, which just doesn't help.
Was Ja's ban for 25 from like game 1 of this season? So he misses the first 25 of the season.
Because
it was in the off season.
Yeah,
I was going to say, but was there any playoff games that it took off it just so he could come back soon? It wasn't that, was it?
No, it was.
They waited for the announcement, didn't they? Because everyone realised that they were letting it blow over a little bit so that you could focus on the actual playoff.
Yeah, I mean, if Marcus Smart's taking like 10 plus shots for your team, it's probably not going to go down very well. And like I say, he's a good player and he can get hot sometimes offensively, but like you say, he's not a dictator. Like, he can't dictate play like that. And I think that's one of the issues that the Celtics had with him a little bit, and something that they've kind of rectified with like the amazing backcourt that they have now with White and Drew Holiday. But yeah, they missed Tyus Jones, I think. When we talk about that Memphis team who dealt well with Ja's absence a couple seasons ago, Tyus Jones was probably one of the best backup point guards in the league. So he could come in and figure out that offense and get everyone going a little bit. He's not as good as Ja, but he was a sort of decent value replacement, whereas they just don't have that now. And obviously no Steven Adams like going down before the season starts with a massive injury is a big blow for their defense. They're not as bad on defensive rating. I've just checked. They're like middle of the pack, 16, I think now. Yeah. But when I checked a couple of days ago, they were bottom, which is not good enough for a team that has a supposed two defensive players of the year, the last two, in fact. So, it's like the classic Man United thing with David Moyes a couple of years ago. Like, we need to get better at passing, defending, scoring, and pretty much everything. I mean, it could get a bit of a slippery slope though, because if Ja's out for 25 games, they're 1-7 now, right? If they, I don't know, like if they just come out with like an absolutely horrific record by the time he gets back, what do you even do then? Do you like try and go for it? Do you sort of like sit a couple
they have to
maybe try and get
they have to go for it.
They have to go for it.
Yeah, they have to, but I don't know how well it's going to go at that stage. I don't, like 39-16 to get like a decent record.
I think the thing with it as well is the West is so hard that if they are really, really down in the dumps when it comes to the 25 mark, if they're like 4-20 when he comes in, they're done.
Yeah,
like their season's done.
I doubt they're going to be that. Oh yeah.
I don't think so.
I'm just taking the average. I'm just taking what they're projected. But I mean, like when you look, they're playing the Heat next, the Jazz. Oh, that's it. The Jazz, the Clippers, the Lakers, the Spurs, the Celtics, the Rockets, and the Suns. There's 2 wins there, maybe, I think. So it's like,
yeah. The
Heat aren't that good.
That's why I threw them in here, and why I was happy that Louis picked out the Timberwolves, because when it comes to the start of the season, it's you can look at the records, but it's mainly who you're playing against, who you've played against, really. And the Grizzlies have had a couple really bad losses so far this season. So.
Did the Lakers go 1-10 and make the play in last year? Was that it, or was that the year before?
No, I don't know if they were 1-10. They had a really.
I think they might have been 2-10. They might have been
2-10. They were like 2-10 or 1-10. They were terrible.
They were 0-5. So, I think to start. Same as Grizzly. I think it's 0-6.
I think I remember 1-10 or 2-10 because I remember being on like First Take and things like that, and all that rubbish that come with it. So it isn't like impossible for them to salvage their season at this point. And don't get me wrong, if they win the next 3 games, people are going to be like, "Oh, they're fine." But the stocks are down. I'll take my selection for stocks are down, and then we'll leave it to you to the end, Louis. And now, what you're about to see on screen is not the sole embodiment of where I believe the stocks are down, but I believe it's a big point to it. And I think that I have to rightly so bring up Bradley Beal and the Phoenix Suns.
That's the other team. That's the other team I was thinking of.
Now, I mean, this photo is very glamorous. I don't know what the sort of... I feel like this is probably a theme in the car that comes with it for the jersey. Unfortunately, you won't have seen Bradley Beal in any of Phoenix Sun jersey yet because he's been injured since he joined. And this is the issue that comes with the Phoenix Suns, because you've had Bradley Beal out and Booker's played like 2 games or 3 games. And when you have 3 major all-stars earning lots and lots of money, and then you have to rely on role players, if a couple of them get injured, what happens is you start to lose games, and that's what's happened with the Phoenix Suns, because I think they're sitting at 3-5, 3-4, 3-4, 12th in the West right now. It's not all doom and gloom, but the 2 losses against the Spurs were alarmingly bad, is what I will say, and that's the big concern in terms of where you don't have your main guys and you're relying on role players. You can even get beat by the San Antonio Spurs, and again, it all depends on how long Beal and Booker are going to be out for here. But if we're talking stocks down, right now, in terms of how high people were on Phoenix, nearly 10 games into the season, it's not looking too great, is it?
Yeah, I do think the Suns will be fine. I will say that. It's just the at the moment they've not been great, but I think the couple things that I've taken away from them so far is one, and I think Point Booker will solve this a little bit. I do have confidence that he'll be able to move into that role for this team to a decent level. But they're fourth in turnovers at the moment, and their assist turnover ratio is pretty bad as well. And I think when people look to, obviously they've Chris Paul left and they haven't got a natural point guard, that is something that could be an issue for them. I know in the playoffs it was a lot of, it's Booker's turn, it's KD's turn, and it wasn't so much a seamless basketball team like someone would say like the Denver Nuggets are, for example. And I think that's something you'd like to see not remain the case throughout the season. Devin Booker coming back, I think, will help solve that. I do think he can play that role to a high level for them, but I still think that'll be a bit of an issue throughout the year. And then the other one for me was when we spoke about before about teams getting size to maybe combat what looks like is going to be the changing environment in the NBA. Obviously, the Suns went and got Nurkic. Nurkic is not going to help that in the slightest. It just is what it is. I've watched a few games now where he's just getting torched. And you're just kidding yourselves if you think someone like a Jokic, if they match up, say they match up in the playoffs, Nurkic can't do anything with him. It's as simple as that. So I think that is something that will still be an issue for them.
I don't understand why they moved off of Ayton particularly still. I mean, I know he wasn't great in the playoffs, and I know he has his issues, but he's a better option than Nurkic is, and I'm not sure really what they got back from being involved in that Dame trade particularly. That was just my opinion. Coming out of that trade, I thought they got worse, and I think that eye test has kind of proven me right a little bit on that. I want to add another thing onto it as well. Like KD's the only one that's really playing games at the moment, and that's just not what you want whatsoever. You want that guy to be as fresh as possible because he's 34, and I know we've got a guy in year 21 of his career right now, just like playing 40 minutes, and well, he's not playing that many minutes actually, but he's playing really well, and he's just like performing like feats of absolute marvel at his age. But KD is not the same type of player, and he's been breaking down steadily over the last couple of years. He's had a couple, really big long absences during the regular season. And I think every time they've come to the playoffs, he's not really looked fresh. And I thought a big part of having Booker already there and bringing in Beal was that you take that off of him a little bit, not even just games, but possessions that they can run, and he can just sort of come in and sort of kill the game a little bit more. So that's not happened. He's had to do a lot. And I'm also going to say it's not that big to lose against the San Antonio Spurs. I do have a generational prospect.
It was more the manner. It was the manner. Yeah. They were up by 22 and they lost. That was the damning point for it. I think if Wemby catches heat and drags the Spurs to a victory, I don't think I would begrudge it against any team, even Denver. I wouldn't be like, damn, what on earth happened there? But it was the manner of if you're up 22, any team that comes back on a 22. I mean, most bookies pay out as a win on 20-point wins. So it was that mad. That was.
Yeah, I mean, defensively, they're not going to be good. That is I think an overriding issue that they're going to have to deal with. Is they're going to have to.
Well, I mean, lads, they've got a generational talent themselves sitting on the bench, and he's getting coaches DMPs every night, and that's Bol Bol. And I don't know why Bol Bol is getting coaches DMPs, but I mean.
I mean, it is what it is, isn't it? But it's interesting. I'll just say quickly, when you talk about the KD thing, we haven't mentioned the Lakers. I mean, they don't have as many issues at the moment, especially with the injuries, obviously. Although AD did get injured a bit last game, it's similar in what they've had to do with LeBron, where after the first game, they came out and said LeBron, they're going to aim to play him like 29 minutes or something like that. I think it might have been less. And he's basically having to play every game late in the fourth, and he's one of the highest point scorers in the fourth quarter this year, I think. And it's purely because without him, they're just not going to perform as a team well enough. So it's tough when you've got players like KD and LeBron at that age and them having to be the main guy on their team, still you think they'd be able to make that transition, but they
AD's playing 40 minutes a game. It's recipe for disaster.
AD's just. I'm just waiting for him to get injured. If I'm being completely honest, I don't want it to happen, but it is going to happen.
I did enjoy as well a bit of a meltdown on Twitter from some people after Bill got injured. I saw a couple of side by sides where it was like him at the practice facility now, and then him when he was on the Wizards, comparing the jump shots, and one was so much more fluid and smooth than the other one. They were saying, "Oh, we're cooked with small." It's like, calm down. It's not doom and gloom.
I think they had a good first game against the Warriors. I will say that. I was impressed by that game, but that was a Warriors team without Draymond. And we didn't even talk about the Warriors, and I think they've been quite good. But yeah.
We haven't. Louis, to round off this podcast, who is your stocks falling in the NBA after the first 2 weeks?
I was between two, but I think I've decided now. I was going to say Julius Randle, but he had a good game last night. And also his stocks were kind of low coming into the season, if I'm honest. Just poor. His body language is like some of the worst things. He's like the worst on earth. That guy's a teammate. Must be interesting. But anyway, now I'm between two now just because one's popped in my head. But I'm going to go to Bucks. I'm going to stick with what I was thinking.
Okay.
Because I had high expectations for them coming into the season. So it's by default a bit of a stock down that they haven't been as convincing as I thought they would be. I think, like Lewis mentioned earlier on, defensively, they have some things to figure out. And then they might not be able to figure it out because Dame is like a net negative defender. He's not good. So the way they're going to have to hide that is up to anyone's guess. I mean, that's up to Adrian Griffin, and I'm not sure, as a sort of rookie head coach, he's got a lot to deal with here. And obviously, just before the season, Terry Stotts, who was his assistant there, who was previously Dame's coach in Portland, he left right before the season started under pretty dubious circumstances. I don't think they've really said why that happened, but I think the implication is that him and Griffin had a bit of a falling out. But defensively, they've got some stuff to figure out. They're getting attacked in that aspect. They're sort of they're not using, the Budenholzer system with Lopez dropping, Giannis roaming, that type of thing. So maybe that can be put down to the fact that there's a lot of moving pieces, a new system, whatever. Offensively, they've not been good enough either. I don't think it's looked as seamless as I thought it would do. The pick and roll, as much as I thought that was going to be just like surefire points every single time between Dame and Giannis, it looks like they've got some figuring out there to do as well. And it doesn't seem like they're having good games in tandem at the moment. It feels like one will have a great game. Dame was great on the opening night when they won against the Sixers. Then it'll be Giannis, like Giannis last night was great. It's not been as convincing as I thought it would be to start the season. And the fact that Boston have looked so imposing is probably swaying this a little bit for me. They look by far and above like the separate sort of team within the Eastern Conference. And if you're going to throw the whole NBA in there, Denver look miles better as well. So that's what I've got to have to go for a minute, because this team has title aspirations, as much as Giannis may go on a press conference and say that it's not fair if they don't win a title. It will be. If they come down to the end of the season, they don't win a title or even get to the finals, they'll be disappointed. So that's the way I've got to look at it.
I think minimum it has to be conference finals for this team. So I do think that the Celtics are better than them. So I can't say if they didn't get to finals it'd be a failure, because I think a team in their conference is better. But I do think a lot of it with the Bucks at the moment will be growing pains. I'm more worried about the defense because it's a shift of system for them, and that is something that can take a lot of time. And obviously a new coach, so these things can take a lot of time, and maybe you don't get it right immediately. So that could potentially still be an issue later down the line. When it comes to the offense, go on, you go.
No, I do understand that the shift in the system, but Dame is always going to be a bad defender.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how they're going to hide that, particularly, especially when in the Eastern Conference you've got guards that can go off. Maxey could have a gamer against the Bucks. So could any of the Celtics guards. So could Trae Young.
I think a key thing for the Bucks is going to be Chris Middleton. He's really going to be a key item for him this year in terms of where he can play, and that's the concern, is that if Chris Middleton's going to be a key item for you, you can't really bank on him at the moment in terms of his health. He's not really been fully healthy now for 2, maybe even 3 seasons. if we're being completely honest. But I think that it's still just teething problems with the Bucks. I think they're just getting used. Like Damian Lillard is such a different player to what they've had. That I mean, they're running up an offense all through him now. It was never Drew Holiday realistically to begin with. So there is such a big change. And even though they're like, we're talking all about this, they're 4-2 and they're 1 game behind. So they could be 5-2. So it's still not all doom and gloom for them. Like, I know that the game against Philly was like what you'd expect to see of Giannis and Lillard, and we haven't seen it again since. But I'm not stressed about the Bucks at all, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, as I said, I think they'll be fine. I do think when we were talking about the offense, I think when people saw a Dame and a Giannis, a big and a guard, it does seem like it will be seamless. It's not to the level that a Jokic and a Murray is, purely because, you talked before about Anthony Edwards and Gobert, and look, Giannis can do a lot more than Gobert, don't get me wrong. But Giannis is limited in that situation. And the one thing that is incredible about the Bucks when they run that pick and roll is they can set it so high because Dame is just shooting from anywhere. So that is obviously a massive plus. But it is limited in what Giannis does then from that. So I think that's why it's not as seamless as say Jokic and Murray, purely because they've got so much more options that they can go to than someone like a Giannis does. He's obviously still, top 2 player in the NBA. So this is very, very acute criticisms. I'm not saying Giannis isn't a good player. He's obviously unbelievable. And when you have players like a Brook Lopez, who is similar into Porzingis, that when they stretch the floor, it's not like normal. They shoot it deep as well, which obviously aids to them. And I think the Chris Middleton factor is a bigger factor than what I've just said before. I think they will need him to step up offensively and defensively as well. So I think you have to look to him to see if they can really compete with the Celtics come playoff time.
I agree with you. I think in the offensive, I think they'll figure that out. I'm not as worried about that. But I think defensively, they will always have a bit of an issue. And I don't think that's going to get resolved unless they bring someone in there that can really guard other guards, if I'm quite honest. I wouldn't be surprised if they're active at the trade deadline, or if they tried like Beauchamp or something like that to try and shore that up. But they can get like a good guard is going to have a big game against the Bucks, and if you don't, you'd probably be a bit like disappointed in him, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I think obviously the ethos before the season with the trades that happened was that the increase and improvement they had offensively would make up for the defensive struggles. So we'll have to see how that balance works out throughout the season. And obviously, it's so early that we can't really tell at the moment.
Yeah. I think that when you used to have it, I mean, the difference as well as when teams would come, normally Drew would obviously pick up the guy on ball, and now it's Giannis, and then it messes up the rest of their defensive sort of spacing and situations they've got. So a lot of teething problems still for it. But I mean, like we said, we're only still in the first 2 weeks of the season. We're going to wrap this one up here. Thank you very much for watching / listening. If you haven't yet, subscribe to us here on YouTube for everything that we do on the NBA, and also some of the so rare stuff that we're doing as well. If you're listening to this on audio, please leave us a review over there. And also, if you're listening to it on Apple Podcasts, hit 5 stars for us. It would mean more than you could possibly imagine. I think I said that right in any case. But we're going to get out of here. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll catch you in the next one. Peace.